Hello Legionnaires, this is Maxiel from Legion of Myth, and today I'm going to talk to you about my favorite discipline in the Earthdawn role-playing game, the Nethermancer. If you have not watched my earlier videos, please be sure to watch the one titled Earthdawn Disciplines and Adepts, an overview, as it explains the nuances of what it means to be an adept who follows a discipline in the Earthdawn role-playing game. I'll post a link to that in the description below. If you enjoy this Earthdawn content, or if you have a desire for other anime, comics, and gaming-related news and reviews, please be sure to subscribe to the Legion of Myth channel and mash that ding-a-ling-a-ling bell icon to turn on notifications. Don't miss an episode. By now, you know the deal. I will be discussing the Nethermancer discipline primarily in terms of 4th edition Earthdawn, as it is the most recent version of the game and thus the most appropriate version to discuss. So, let us journey now through the astral shadows, away from this ignorant and mundane reality, in order to commune with the spirit of the Nethermancer. What is the Earthdawn Nethermancer? First and foremost, throw the notion of the common necromancer out of your mind. An Earthdawn Nethermancer is not simply another game's necromancer by a different name. What you would identify as necromancy is only one and arguably small single facet of what the Earthdawn Nethermancer is. In fact, I'm only going to talk about undead in passing, as it is a trivial and one-dimensional part of the Nethermancer's entire toolkit. In my games, I really focus and harp on the fact that the player characters are heroes. Farscape has enough villains and monsters, the PCs don't need to add to that. However, being a hero doesn't always mean being the nicest person or even sharing the same moral compass as the village through which you are traveling. Keep that in mind as you begin to understand the Nethermancer's explorations serve to protect name-givers from the horrors and their construct. Because Nethermancers will tread where others are unwilling, they are the last, best hope of defense between this fragile mortal world and the worlds of horror and death. Nethermancers don't fear death. Death is but a doorway to another way of being. To a Nethermancer, neither life nor death are inferior or superior to each other, but are individual phases in building one's legend. Nethermancers accept death precisely because they know it intimately, and with this acceptance, they give up their fears of it. On the other hand, Nethermancers do seek to understand the metaphysics of the spirit or soul. The spirit is the engine of one's being and is inexorably connected to the body. The spirit contains the being's true identity and name. It is the true person. What is the fate of one's spirit after death, you may wonder? To this, even Nethermancers don't have an agreeable answer. In pursuit of the secrets to the spirit and soul, the Nethermancer often travels to other realities, planes, and dimensions. As a result of their explorations into the spirit and soul, all Nethermancer talents come from the understanding of the spirit. It is through this understanding the Nethermancer is able to manipulate and shape the patterns of others to create their effects. They know you better than you know you. This invasive knowledge, compounded by the ignorance of the masses, generally causes Nethermancers to be feared, shunned, and reviled. In turn, Nethermancers like to sardonically look down upon those ignorant morons, further feeding into the negative emotions and stereotypes of Nethermancers and their practices. Fear is an emotion not worthy of a Nethermancer. It is only useful when found in others. In this, fear gives the Nethermancer control to lead the fearful as one would a dog on a leash. By and large, Nethermancers tend to be introspective, contemplative, and actually sedate people who certainly lack any self-doubt. In search of knowledge of the spirit or to protect the world from horrors, a Nethermancer fears no path and no destination. On the same token, there's little compassion for foolish behavior. Only if you believe that magic is unnatural can you believe the same of the undead. As with all magician spells, or even the Swordmaster's sword, Nethermancer magic has no mind, no morality. Only the individual can make the choice to use magic for good or evil. In the same vein, Nethermancers investigate the very nature of horrors. They do this in order to push them back and to seal off this mortal realm from the horrors. By virtue of these investigations into the inner spirit of horrors, Nethermancers often learn to use the same powers the horrors use. Fight fire with fire, or more aptly, fight spirit with spirit. As you can see, moral relativism is a mastered skill for a discipline that holds few absolute rules of behavior. The long-term end justifies the mean. Right, so what does it mean to be the Nethermancer's player? What should you expect if you choose Nethermancer as your character's discipline? First of all, you're creepy. Even if you don't want to be creepy, you just can't get around it. When you read the description of the various spells and talents, even if you're the most benign and sane person, well, that just makes you even creepier. You can't avoid the fact that many Nethermancer spells and abilities are icky. In pursuit of research, a Nethermancer will oftentimes, willfully or ignorantly, break local taboos of good and decent behavior, as taboos are nothing but codified foolishness. You have chosen a discipline that, because of their flagrant disdain of accepted norms and because their research leads them to places others cannot understand, most Barsavians view with suspicion and fear. And talents such as Frighten play into the Nethermancer's creepy theme, while also being mechanically sound. Astral Sight and Spirit Talk are great thematic talents that are good for information gathering. A particular note is Summon Ally Spirit. Summon Ally Spirit is not a spell, but a natural ability, a talent, to summon a spirit for an hour or more. Upon reaching 9th Circle, the Nethermancer receives the Matrix Sight talent, which in my experience is incredibly potent. Among its other abilities, this talent allows the Nethermancer to see and target, and thus destroy, the spell matrices of other spellcasters. In spell combat, Nethermancers attack Mystic Defense while also lowering the Mystic stats of the victim. Over the course of time, a Nethermancer's spell will rot the spirit of the victim, making it easier for the Nethermancer to inflict harm. Spirit Dart, it's your crutch damage spell. As a Swordmaster wields a sword, so will you wield Spirit Dart. It may not do a ton of damage, but it attacks what is usually the most vulnerable defense, and weakens mystic armor of the victim in kind. The aspect spells are amazing for both mechanics and prose. And while I'm known for being a curmudgeon who hates change, I do, the addition of these spells are nothing but a pure positive for 4th edition Nethermancer. I love them! In quick, simple terms, the various aspect spells summon and bind a particular type of spirit to a willing character. This binding provides bonuses to action appropriate to the type of spirit. The Wither, Bone Shatter, and Bone Pudding spells, if not damaged certainly by descriptors, are some of the creepiest and meanest spells in the game. At 5th Circle, the Nethermancer learns how to use blood magic to gain extra successes in summoning tests. At 9th Circle, the Nethermancer may perform an 8-hour ritual and spend 1 blood magic to raise his willpower value by 3, effectively a permanent 1-step boost. At 13th Circle, the Nethermancer can use Astral Face, which, for the cost of 4 strain, he now receives a +5 bonus to spellcasting tests. Alchemy is a skill that can be used to create blood charms, common magic items, and consumables such as healing aids, potions, and similar items. Enchanting, accomplished via a talent knack system provided in the 4th edition Earthdawn Companion, is related to the more powerful thread magic items. With a little bit of alchemy, or the appropriate enchanting talent knack, a Nethermancer can craft those wonderful blood charms, like Targeting Eye, where a worm eats the eye in order for the wearer to receive a bonus to missile attacks. How delicious. A Nethermancer can even bind a spirit to an item, though this isn't done as often as you may think. Does the other Nethermancer interest you, or are you creeped out? Hey, let me know in the comments below. In Earthdawn, half magic represents discipline, pertinent knowledge, and skills a character knows or can perform simply by being an adept of that discipline. The Nethermancer adept can use half magic to recognize uses of Nethermantic magic, different types of undead and spirits, and magic rituals, in particular, blood magic rituals. Half magic may be used to understand the effects of blood charms and sense the presence of spirits within 30 yards. All of this taboo nether power comes with some rules. Remember from my overview video that disciplines are not character classes, professions, or archetypes. They are lifestyles. And while the personal vision of each adept may differ, there are some foundations which must remain. As masters of moral relativism, self-assurance is the core of a Nethermancer's being. Simply put, a Nethermancer who begins to doubt the worthiness of his actions has violated his discipline. Next, due to the Nethermancer's belief of life and death, mourning the dead may cause separation of the Nethermancer from his discipline. Of course, appropriate respect may be made if the Nethermancer so desires, but the loss, sadness, and woohooing most mortals feel when someone close to them dies is simply foolish to a Nethermancer. However, the most important faux pas for a Nethermancer is to give in to fear. Fear is completely unworthy of the Nethermancer. Thus, being overcome by fear causes the most powerful of talent crises. Although in my games, I tend not to punish players too harshly for simply rolling poorly. Okay, let's have some fun with the Nethermancer in my variations on a theme segment. It is all too common to create a Nethermancer who simply gathers matrices and pumps up his will force to focus on spellcasting. It is also fairly common to build a Nethermancer who focuses on spirit summoning, or some combination of both spellcasting and spirit summoning. As a variation, I wanted to create a Nethermancer less traveled, a viable Nethermancer to be sure, and one that both fits the Nethermancer theme and is quite useful at the gaming table, but also something a bit different than standard fare. The Occultist Nethermancer, as I call it, is a self-reliant, metaphysical, private investigator. Think of this as the type of character who would fit very well in a Call of Cthulhu campaign. The Occultist Nethermancer focuses less on spellcasting and more on talents and skills, and those talents focus on discovery, research, and getting to places where esoteric information may be hidden. Novice talents include awareness, stealthy stride, dispel magic, and suppress curse, though an argument may be made for void blow in place of suppress curse, depending on your personal vision. At the Journeyman circles, I chose research, Lionheart, astral interference, and Steely Stare. I also debated Bloodshare and Lifesight when I first considered a more group-oriented character. The Warden circles provide the Occultist arguably the best investigative talent in the game, evidence analysis, which I followed up at 10th circle with item history. This is where things became more difficult for me. At this point, I have 2 Warden talent slots remaining, but there are 3 talents I want: Astral Pocket, Perfect Focus, and Safe Thought. I ultimately decided on Perfect Focus and Safe Thought. For the Occultist, Master Circle talents are really just about how you want to play your Occultist at this stage of the game. None of them really stood out to me in terms of my thematic vision for the Occultist. I mean, argument can be made for each and every one of them. And I'm not one to min-max or stat crunch, so in the end, and only because I had already created a Spirit Summoner Specialist and a Spellcasting Specialist, and didn't want to reuse those talents, I chose the master talents of Animal Possession, Lion Spirit, and Resist Pain. Are they the most powerful talents mechanically? No. But I think they play into the Occultist theme fairly well. Look, by the time you reach Master Circles, you're crazy powerful anyway. Now, without getting into a complete list, the spells I made sure to have in order to fit the Occultist vision were Dark Spy, Ethereal Darkness, Experience Death, Shadow Meld, Shadow Whisper, step through shadow, and viewpoint. Gotta do the number thing. Of course, in my mind, Bone Circle is simply mandatory for all Nethermancers, so include that one as well. I'm sure someone will say that I should also have included the Night Flyer spells, and that person would not be wrong. Though a case can be made for every Nethermancer spell. I mean, why would you not want your grimoire filled with more tools? This list includes the spells I felt represented my vision of the Occultist. So what do you think of the Occultist? Would you play it? What tweaks would you make? Let me know in the comments. I was asked why I don't discuss multidiscipline variations in more detail. First, because these videos are about what it means to be an adept of a particular discipline, not the game mechanics around how to play multidiscipline characters. Secondly, because I'm not a fan of multidisciplining. I rarely allow it in my games. Now, that's something for a later time in a different video. For now, I will mention that when taking on a second discipline, the Nethermancer really has no limits. The Nethermancer seeks knowledge and understanding of spirit, any spirit, therefore no path is forbidden to him. Interestingly, the Weaponsmith discipline is one that binds quite well with the Nethermancer on a lower level. From here, unlike my past videos, I'm going to veer away from the supplements of previous versions of Earthdawn. I'm going to posit what I feel and what I have seen work well with the Nethermancer. My reasoning for this is mostly due to the discipline changes in Earthdawn since 1st edition. For example, with the removal of many of the animal abilities, which I feel was appropriate, I don't believe the Beastmaster is as good of a fit for the Nethermancer anymore. Yes, a case can be made for it, I just don't think it's as prevalent as in past editions. On the other hand, I believe Nethermancers can combine well thematically and mechanically with the Wizard, as both disciplines strive to seek knowledge. Sure, to each other, their visions and attitudes are very different, but to non-Wizards and Nethermancers, they're both haughty, arrogant jerks. Additionally, a Wizard's methodology of seeking and deciphering patterns in all things can be used by the Nethermancer for greater understanding of the spirit. Because I am a huge fan of Netherwalk and the extraplanar exploration aspect of the Nethermancer, I feel that Scout is potentially another good discipline to combine with the Nethermancer. Alright, so what are my final thoughts on the Nethermancer discipline? Well, I cannot be silent about my contempt of the inclusion of the automatic secondary spell effects that have been added to all of the 4th edition damage spells. That is an issue about core game mechanics and not the Nethermancer itself. With my admitted bias and conspiracy-worthy skepticism of change, I never thought the Nethermancer of previous editions had any weaknesses or problems that needed to be fixed. However, with that said, as much as I love the Nethermancer of previous editions, the 4th edition Nethermancer was made so much better, both mechanically and thematically, the latter being more important to me. The way Josh and his 4th edition team improved upon the Nethermancer is both unexpected and spot on. Incredibly, I'm even a bigger fan of the discipline than I was before. I love the aspect spells, as well as the general improvements to both spirit and spirit summoning. I love how they maintain the creep and pariah factor of the Nethermancer without creating artificial rules on top of rules like some other systems have done. And let's not forget, that creepy Nethermancer, who is ever waiting to capture your soul in a jar like a butterfly, can be your healer, in as much as there's a healer in Earthdawn. It will only cost you, I don't know, a little bit of knowledge of your true pattern? What harm could that cause? I do hope that a future supplement addresses some of the potential alternate realities or dimensions. Not to the extent of a full setting like what Planescape was for AD&D 2nd edition, but more like 1st edition AD&D's Manual of the Planes. Maybe a full-page overview for each of 4 or 5 different realms, then let the GMs take it from there. To wrap this up, you play a dangerous game when you play a Nethermancer, and a good GM will highlight that in both subtle and overt ways. At what point does the Nethermancer cross a line? Where is the bridge too far when it comes to protecting bar save? How bad can a horror mark really be? Please let me know what you think of this episode and the Nethermancer discipline, and the Earthdawn setting as a whole. If you have a discipline you really want me to cover sooner rather than later, please let me know so I can move it to the top of my list. Until then, you can count on either the Air Sailor or the Thief to be next. Please subscribe to the Legion of Myth channel and mash that bell icon so you can be notified when new videos are uploaded. Finally, I want to let you know about the Legion of Myth weekly live stream every Saturday, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time on twitch.tv/Legion of Myth. See the description below for the link. Our hosts Garthon and Heathen Dog provide anime reviews, tabletop gaming fundamentals, comic book reviews, and other nerd topics that should interest you. If you can't catch them live, you can always watch past episodes on this Legion of Myth YouTube channel. And with that, I will see you next time, and I hope you have a wonderful day.